Hi folks, welcome back to the Frontier Western Heritage YouTube channel. I'm Todd Kessner here in Bozeman, Montana, and today we're going to talk about black powder loads for the 4570. And the rifle I've used probably the last 25 years for all big game in Montana is this 1886 Winchester. And I've got an opportunity to hunt pigs in Texas this spring, early spring in March, and thought, what can I do a little bit different to make this kind of a different experience and a bit more fun. I have used a 400 grain copper jacketed bullet, soft point bullet with about 51 grains of 4064, and have been able to take about every big game animal in Montana with this 86 Winchester, except for bighorn sheep. I can't, that's a tough draw here and I haven't been drawn yet. But for some reason I just have never put black powder cartridge through this particular rifle, and thought this would be kind of a fun opportunity to do something different, maybe make a video out of it. So I've decided to load up some, work up some loads for the 4570. So just a little bit of history on this cartridge. This was the government cartridge, adopted as a government cartridge in 1873, and there's a lot of really cool things that happened in 1873 when it comes to Old West guns. And we've talked about the single action Army Colt, the Winchester 73, and then the trapdoor 73 that took the 4570 cartridge. But it became an extremely popular cartridge once it became the military cartridge, got known pretty well, and threw about a 400 grain bullet over 70 grains of black powder. And so that's what I'm going to try to replicate for this rifle. This is an 1886 Browning, actually, and John Moses Browning invented the 86 Winchester for Winchester, and 100 years later in 1986, as a commemorative, Browning put out about 7,000 of these rifles with a full 26-inch barrel, octagon barrel. They're done authentically with no tang safety like the newest Winchesters have. So it's very much identical to the original 1886 Winchesters, only with better modern steel. So I've been able to push the smokeless loads at about 1,800 feet per second, and it's done the trick on moose and goats and all kinds of big game animals, elk here in Montana. And just for fun, wanted to try to load up some 4570 in black powder for this particular trip. So in 1883, Thomas Bennett, who was the son-in-law of Winchester, took the train out to Ogden, Utah, and he had heard that the Browning brothers there in Ogden, Utah were working on, they had quite a shop and were working on a single-shot rifle that Winchester was interested in. And the Sharps Rifle Company had fallen on hard times, and Winchester was trying to get into that single-shot buffalo-style hunting rifle, and arrived in Ogden, took a look at what Browning had there. That was the 1885 Winchester, which was a drop block lever action single shot, and adopted that, and it did become the 1885 Winchester when it hit the market. While there, Browning was talking about a big bore lever action as well. At the time, Bennett and Winchester were mostly interested in that single shot. A few years later, John Browning and his brother took the train back to Connecticut, brought a prototype of what became the 1886 Winchester, and convinced Winchester to go ahead and manufacture that. The advantage of the 86 is that it would hold this 4570 cartridge that was so popular with with buffalo hunters and civilians alike, any kind of hunter alike, and the previous Winchesters wouldn't hold that government model. And so they tried with the 1876 Winchester. It was a blown up larger version of the 73. That toggle link action just wasn't long enough to handle the 4570. And so when Browning invented the 1886 Winchester, he made it big enough to handle that 4570. It was a big plus for the Winchester line. They now had a rifle that could chamber a 4570, even some slightly larger cartridges, and had a repeating rifle that used those Buffalo style cartridges. So we're going to load up some of these several different varieties of the 4570 using some different powders mostly, and those powders have different densities, so we'll have some different compaction and compression rates. And the next video, after we've got these loaded up and we're ready to go to the range, I will test them out on the range and put them to the test is what I'm trying to say, and we'll see how they perform. Well, as you can see, the key to any successful reloading operation is a clutter-free workspace. And if you actually have one, I'm super impressed. But we do have everything laid out here that we need. And I've got a 4570 case ready to go. I've already annealed it. And that means I've just heated the top half of this case and dropped it in water and made it soft again. So this case is annealed. If you watch the loading brass 12-gauge shotgun shells, you would have seen the annealing process, but I've already done that to this case. So I'm going to size it. I'm going to bell the top so that it'll accept a bullet, and then I'll prime it, and we'll move on to loading the powder here in just a second. So let me get a couple of these sized, a couple of them belled, and put the 215 Magnum rifle primer in it, and then we'll move on to loading the powder. Alright, so I'm going to take this previously annealed shell and case, and I'm going to run it down my pad here, lubrication pad, because I've got a lot of surface area that I'm wanting to resize. And so once I get this lubricated, I can get it inside the resizing die without getting a case stuck, and get this nice and resized. And then I'm going to switch over to my belling die so I can bell the end of this case. So I've moved this over to the die that'll bell open the end of the case and allow the bullet to get in without shaving any lead. So I'm going to go ahead and ram that in and place a Magnum rifle primer in there on the way and the stroke back out. Got that. And now I've got a case that is ready to be charged with powder, and so we'll do that next and we'll move on from there. Well, if you watch the loading the brass 12-gauge shotgun shells, you're familiar with my black powder reloading measurer, my black powder measurer here. So I have changed the setting, obviously, from the 12-gauge. I've got the first load I'm trying here. I'm going with about 70 grains because it's a 4570. Figure might as well start there of double F and of black powder, and so GoX. And that's a load that I've looked up in a few different reloading manuals and some expert advice, guys that shoot 4570 with black powder a ton. So I have set this to be relatively close to 70 grains. So we're going to go ahead, and you'll see that I've got the drop tube off of it, because I'm going to weigh these rounds. These are test rounds. I want these pretty much as consistent as I can get them. So we're going to go ahead and put the 70 grains in my scale pan. And then I'll have to take it over to the scale, and we're getting this isn't as efficient as the way I normally reload, but we also need to get this on camera without shadows and darkness and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to move over to a different place here in the room and set this on the scale, and then top it off at 70 grains. Yep. So I've got my scale preset. I got it nice and leveled and squared. And I got it preset here for 70 grains, and man, I hit it right on the nose. I don't even have to use a powder trickler. So I'm just going to rejoice in that and take this over, and we're going to run this down the drop tube. So I've got a 24-inch drop tube here, and what this is going to do for me, I could drop if I didn't have to weigh every round, I could take the drop tube on my powder measure and just run it down that tube and into the case. But I'm weighing them, so I'm going to run it down the drop tube, and this allows the powder to set in the case in a column that falls in gravity fed and packs itself consistently from top to bottom. So the key to this is always pour it in the funnel about the same rate time after time. So I'm going to go ahead and pour this down into my case, and And if I do that about the same every time, then I'm in pretty good shape, and that'll be relatively consistent. Muzzle loaders would do the same thing, only the drop tube is the barrel of the gun. And so if I had a volume of powder I was pouring down the barrel, it does the same thing. It just goes down the barrel of the muzzle loader, put a patch and ball over it, and then compress it down, and you've done the same thing. This will allow for a consistent pack from top to bottom. So I'm going to pull that out of there, and then we're going to have to compress this load so that we've got room for the bullet. So you can see I've got this thing nearly filled with double F GoX 70 grains, and there's going to be some serious compression on this particular load, and so we're going to do that next with a compression die so I don't deform the bullet. So now we're back at the press. I've got a compression die, and inside of this compression die is a piston just like this. This one's 50 caliber, so I took it out. This one's for the sharps. This is 45 caliber inside of this die, and I need to compress this powder so that I get this bullet setting right square on top of the powder with the case coming up right to where the crimp groove is. So I've got a vegetable wad that I'm going to put in here. I have two of them by accident. I've got a vegetable wad that's just a dry wad, and I'm going to put that over the powder. And what that does for me is it keeps any of the bullet lube separated, that's on my bullet, separated from the black powder charge. So we're going to get quite a compression on this, because this is going to have to really go down a long way. It's got a pretty good load on it. Some recipes actually called for 75 grains, and that would almost fall over the top of the case. So this is at 70, and GoX seems to be able to operate pretty well compressed, and so we will see, because this is compressed probably 1/4 of an inch or better, if maybe even 3/8, but that's what the case calls for. So now I've got it compressed with my wad sitting on top, and I can move this press over to the die that seats the bullet and puts a good crimp on it. Should be able to get the bullet all the way in now anyway without the bullet seater. Yeah, can do that. That's one nice thing about lubricated bullets and having it belled. So I'm going to move this over to the crimp die. So I am positioned under the crimp die, and my bullet is seated right down where the crimp groove is. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in this die. I'm going to put a crimp on that bullet. Absolutely perfect. And so now I can put that in a lever action repeating rifle and not think the bullet's going to jump around. And really it's sitting right on the powder. And the biggest thing with the lever gun is if you do have a loose crimp and you have not a full case, which you have to have a full case with black powder, but if you had smokeless, you didn't have a full case, and then that lever gun, if they're not crimped, sometimes that bullet will sink down inside of the case. It won't sink down inside of the case with this because we've got compressed powder load underneath, but I still like to have a nice crimp on it, and that is definitely looking pretty good. So that's what we want for that. This is the 2F GoX, and the last thing I'm going to do is I've got notes that this load is 70 grains of 2F GoX black powder, and which I've coated blue. So I'm going to coat that blue. We're going to put that in the pile of stuff to test, and we'll know what we're testing. So I'm going to go ahead and load a couple more of these just so I have my 5 test rounds, and then we're going to move to a different powder. And so we'll just come back to the video when the next powder charge is ready. We can see what differences we have in compression rates. All right, we're on the compression die here with the 3F GoX. Yeah, it's still getting some compression, but not nearly as much as the 2F. And so now I can put a bullet in that and code my primer so I remember which round is which round. These are going to be green on the 3F GoX. And we'll move on to another powder, and we'll see what that looks like through the drop tube. So this time I'm trying 2F Old Ainsford. I'm going to pour this down the drop tube as well. Kind of curious to see from GoX 2F to Old Ainsford 2F what kind of a, if any difference, what kind of difference there is. So let's take a look at that. The 2F Old Ainsford is actually much more condensed than the 2F GoX, because I've got quite a bit more room in my case. So I'm going to go ahead and run that through the through the compression die, put a bullet in this one, and we'll move to the next powder. All right, so there we are. So I'm going to run my 2F Old Ainsford there. A lot of compression. Drop a bullet in that one, and we'll move on to the next powder. All right, so here's trial number 4. This is 3F Old Ainsford, and so I'm going to give this a try, and this is a lot finer granulation and much more dense. So let's see how much of a case full we get with this particular powder. Boy, really a lot like the old Ainsford that was 2F, but definitely tighter packed for the same weight that we got with the GoX. So we're going to go ahead and put a fiber wad on there and compress this, and then we'll get that bullet on it, and we got one more powder to go. So this is a 1.5 Swiss, and I just thought I'd give it a try. I've got some 1.5 Swiss laying around for using on the sharps, and so I thought, what the heck, let's give this a try. So weighed out 70 grains again, and it's a coarser powder, so we will see here how much of the case this fills up, and I hope the case holds it, because it is a coarser powder. Wow. It also is a denser powder. I've got a lot more room than I would have predicted, so not going to have to compress the Swiss nearly as much, and that's kind of good news, because Swiss powder, it's an excellent powder, but it doesn't perform as well compressed as GoX does. GoX takes a ton of compression, Swiss not so much. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see which one of these things will perform. So I'm going to put the fiber wad on here, go ahead and compress that, put in the last bullet for this trial, and kind of decide where we want to go from there. I did want to mention a couple of things. One is that you may be thinking, how do you know that 70 grains by weight is the right amount? And honestly, I don't. I just looked up some popular loads from guys that shoot a lot of 45-70 and just kind of interpolated a little bit on the bullet weight that they were using and that sort of thing. I'm just hoping I get lucky that one of these powders performs well enough that then I can start playing with it a little bit more. So maybe it's 65 grains, maybe it's 72. It's hard to say. The other thing you may be asking and thinking about is, why am I weighing these? Because black powder should be done by volume and not by weight. And I can just get a lot better consistency when I weigh each charge, and I can use a powder trickler, I can get it right on. And if you take a scoop of black powder, a volume scoop, and that's what you're going to use, and a lot of guys scoop it and they do just fine, but if you take a scoop and then you just gently tap that scoop on the top of a tabletop or something, you'll see that it settles. And if you tap it again, it settles a little bit more. And so you've got to be a really, I guess, a precise scooper to get the kind of consistency from scoop to scoop, because if you do anything just a little bit different, you're going to compact that powder and get a little bit more in one charge, less in another. And I'm not that consistent of a scooper to be able to have what I feel is that consistent charge. So if I weigh them, then I know if I wanted 70 grains, I got 70 grains. I can be a lot more consistent on the scale, and there's not as much human error unless you pour it through your drop tube at a completely different rate. So this is what I found works well for me. It is a lot more precise round to round, and that's why I've gone by weight instead of volume. So we are going to load up all of these. We're going to have 5 different powders in different granulations to play around with. Take it out to the range. We'll do that this winter. We're at the beginning of February right now, so in Montana we're hoping for a little bit of warm weather that at least makes it so it's not quite so miserable to be outside. Get it above 0 and we'll be happy. So we will take you to the range. We'll test these things, see which one of these works. Maybe I get lucky, I get a great round right off the bat. If not, maybe I get enough data where I can start playing with it a little bit more and be able to take something that I'm confident in on that Texas pig hunt in March. So thanks for coming. Appreciate you tuning in to the Frontier Western Heritage channel once again. And if you like the video, hit that thumbs up button. remember to subscribe, and we will see you back out at the range. We're going to test some 4570 black powder loads. The brass 12-gauge shotgun video. Let me start over again. And that has been extremely, shoot, what's the word I'm looking for? All right, so I've got a, why don't you turn it off so I can just delete that one?
Consistent.
Not really. It works. It works.
It works extremely well.
Efficient, not efficient. Oh my gosh. All right. So okay, not so excited. Woo.
I don't know.
Listen to the day and this is the day we're having. Oh golly.